Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are now entering day 117 of the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And as I have talked about before, we seem to be on this gravitational pull on what could be leading the world to global war between Russian Federation, quite possibly its Chinese allies, Belarus, other nation states against the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. What specifically has happened over the last 24 hours that is further exacerbating the situation? Well, within the last 24, 48 hours, Lithuania has declared that it was now going to start blocking railway traffic from Lithuania, which goes obviously overland from Belarus and then Russia into Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is the is Russian territory. It was once East Prussia, and after World War II, the Russians took control of it. Now, obviously, there are no more Prussians or Germans living in East Prussia or Kaliningrad. It is namely populated by Russians. And right now, the Lithuanians are saying, well, we're going to block railway traffic of certain material that could be sanctioned by the global effort or the Western effort against Russia proper, in terms of what we're seeing happen with obviously Russia and Ukraine. And specifically, the Kremlin, and I'm reading this out of a news excerpt, the Kremlin has threatened Lithuania after EU-sanctioned goods were blocked from reaching the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, fueling fears of NATO being dragged into the war. And the headline reads, "Is Lithuania on the verge of dragging NATO into Ukraine war? Moscow warns it will take actions after alliance member blocks trains carrying goods to Russia's Kaliningrad territory." Now, specifically, what is being blocked is items that normally would not be allowed into Russia via the West, given sanctions. That would include technology, coal, metals, construction material, and namely, again, advanced electronics. But you got to understand that most of this equipment is not coming from the West. It's pre-existing arrangements, given the situation with Kaliningrad, in which Russia already possesses these items and is simply sending these items to Kaliningrad. And right now, Lithuania is saying, nope, not going to happen. In all probability, they're going to attempt to inspect these trains moving from Russia proper into the Kaliningrad Oblast. So again, just something that is going to continue to exacerbate what is happening within the conflict. And again, right now, Russia is saying that there will be repercussions if train transport is cut off to the Kaliningrad Oblast. And again, that's in this area here. And you have to understand it is completely disconnected from the rest of the Russian Federation. There is a very small area. It's called the Suwalki Gap. That is this area that my map is acting up. That Lithuania actually controls. And it would probably not be a great effort for some sort of, if open hostilities were to commence, we would probably see Russian forces very quickly attempt to establish control over a corridor linking Kaliningrad with Belarus. And again, we're just going to continue to watch this as the situation continues. This gravitational pull towards what could be major hostilities between the Russian Federation and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, quite possibly isolated members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which would be the Baltic states. I've talked about this in depth in terms of what NATO states would come to the aid of the Baltic states. I do not believe that if we cross into that threshold of war, we would see the NATO alliance completely acting in unison against Russian forces, given the defense posture of a lot of these nations, such as Germany, France, have neglected their armed forces. Probably not as much, I would say, in terms of France, but specifically the Germans have absolutely neglected its armed forces, and then the question comes into play, would it even have the capability to attempt to launch some sort of offensive operation to reclaim territory that the Russians could take from Lithuania, or we could see some sort of complete conquest of all three Baltic states. If the Russians were to move against one Baltic state, it just does not seem plausible. It would be isolated to one Baltic state. For the strategic considerations, it seems that in all likelihood Russian forces would make a move against all three Baltic nation states in order to negate any sort of buildup of Western forces, of NATO forces, UK, United States forces that could try to reinforce areas in the Baltics. And but again, I don't see NATO remaining a stable, cohesive force if the balloon goes up, especially over the Baltics. Just don't see some states honoring its commitments, namely Germany. I don't see Turkey coming to the aid of the Baltic states as well. And I've talked about that before. Feel free to go back and look at some of the previous videos about the prospects of a concerted NATO defense of the Baltic states. But we continue to watch what's happening in the battlefield that is taking place in eastern Ukraine. I talked about yesterday that there was a Russian strike in more or less central Ukraine against a suspected meeting place of Ukrainian general staff members. Russia reports that up to 50 Ukrainian personnel were killed in an apparent Caliber cruise missile attack on a site in central Ukraine. Again, a meeting place of some high-ranking Ukrainian generals and senior officers. Now, we had initially reported that strike took place in Dnipro. That was the initial area where we had suspected the strike occurred. It sounds like the strike actually occurred southwest of Kryvyi Rih in an area known as Shiroka Dacha, and that is this locale here, very, very small town, more or less like a hamlet, that could have been the meeting place of this of these Ukrainian general staff members that may have been struck, but we have not been able to confirm that as of yet. Ukrainian forces are being mum about what may or may not have transpired, and obviously Russian outlets are very much supportive that a strike did in fact occur. Well, we believe that there have been in fact multiple strikes against Ukrainian leadership nodes that have taken place, especially in regards to brigade command assets, multiple brigade command assets that have taken place in eastern Ukraine, in areas such as near targets near Mykolaiv. But again, Ukrainian forces remain relatively silent on casualties that that its forces sustain in combat, as do Russian forces as well. Obviously, Ukrainian forces have declared that they have killed a number of high-ranking Russian generals and numerous Russian colonels, and very, very little is let loose by the Kremlin in terms of what actually occurred. The only real way to find out if a certain individual may have been taken out by Ukrainian forces via Russia is through the funeral process that is sometimes announced. But outside of that, we have not yet received any word, and we anticipate the Ukrainians will probably keep that information fairly covert at this point and will not let that information out. They will try to ascertain if the strike actually occurred. The Ukrainians intelligence agency will probably be looking for how did the Russians come about the information that Ukrainian general staff members were meeting in said area. So probably not going to get a lot of information, and a lot of the information that we will probably eventually receive will come post-war, after the conflict, which we see which is normal in a lot of conflicts around the globe throughout history. But again, not a lot has happened in terms of territorial changes. Going to do a quick reverse. Going to go back to June. Going to go back to June 15th from the 19th. So just a few days where you, the viewer, can kind of, for the 14th, can kind of see what is happening or has happened over the course of the last few days, especially in the Sloviansk-Severodonetsk Bakhmut pocket. And we'll kind of fast forward here where you can kind of see what exactly Russian forces continue. So you can clearly see they're continuing this push in a more or less a south to north location. They're looking to cut this main Lysychansk to Zoloty highway, and then obviously they're continuing, meaning the Russians, are continuing their push out of Popasna as well, and looking to squeeze Ukrainian forces down here kind of in the south of Lysychansk. We do anticipate the Ukrainians will start to evacuate some of these areas, all of this area, really west of Lysychansk, and areas within this slowly tightening pocket are now able to be hit by massed artillery fire from Russian forces. And there's no area in this area right now that cannot be hit by Russian forces. And that is the same for areas near Sloviansk and Bakhmut as well. We are continuing to see this pressure campaign by Russian forces, again pushing towards Bakhmut, and at the same time pushing north towards Lysychansk, again going to probably attack Lysychansk from the rear. It sounds like most of these areas on the eastern side of the Donets River have been secured by Russian forces. We believe at this point a lot of this gray area and probably further is actually controlled by Russian forces, and it just has been yet changed on the actual map. But that is pretty much it for today. We're going to continue to watch the situation. Obviously, we will report as soon as we get something. One other thing real quick to note, we are continuing to hear about a buildup of Belarusian forces near the Ukrainian border. We do understand the Belarusian armed forces are obviously increasing its capability. They're starting more or less a covert, while not a overt mobilization. They have stipulated they are basically doubling the size of their armed forces, and continuing to do so, and continuing to position themselves for the possibility of hostilities either along their western border, northern border with Lithuania, and obviously the southern border with Ukraine as well. But given the situation now with Lithuania and the Kaliningrad, we're going to have to continue to watch this area very, very closely because things are slowly and steadily getting worse, not better in terms of this conflict escalating. That's what we have for today. Thanks for joining us. More to come.